Appalachian Strong. We hear it and we see it everywhere, TV, radio, newspapers. It's a motto, it's a slogan, it's a cheer, it's a chant, it's a prayer. And it means that the people of the Appalachian Mountains are going to be resilient, resourceful, resolved to rebuild. And I believe it. It isn't new. Anyone who's lived in the Appalachian Mountains has to be strong. They have been for over hundreds of years. Tonight I have a story about a woman who lived there, who made a big difference in healthcare and education. Her name was Mary Martin Sloop. She was born in 1873. That was about a half a dozen years after the Civil War. From an early age, Mary wanted to be a doctor like her father and a missionary. When she got to Davidson College, she was halfway through and she realized she'd never get a medical degree there because women couldn't take anatomy. She knew she'd have to go someplace else to complete her education. But in the meantime, her mother got sick and she had to spend a good number of years tending to her. Finally, she made her way to the Women's Medical College in Pennsylvania and got her medical license. Now she could be a missionary. She wasn't quite 30 years old, and they told her she was too old. Too old to learn a language, and too old to put up with a different climate. As life has it, when she was in medical school, she met Eustace Sloop, who also was a doctor, and also had a desire to help the underserved population. He already had a small practice in a place called Plumtree, North Carolina. It was a marriage made in heaven. They honeymooned in Blowing Rock. They made their way to Plumtree. They stayed there long enough to have a child, and then they realized that most of his patients were in the Morgantown area, in the Linville area, and this was not a good location. So they were talked into moving to Crossmore. Now Crossmore was only 6 or 7 miles away. And they were a small family, mom, dad, baby. What did they have? Clothes and bedding and dishes and pots and pans and medical books and medical things and maybe a stick or two of furniture. But the trails from Plumtree to Crossmore, no vehicle could stand them. They were too bumpy. They just wouldn't work. They had to get a farmer, gave them a sturdy cart and 2 oxen to pull their things the 6 miles from Plumtree to Crossmore. When they got to Crossmore, they were given a cabin circa Civil War. Damp, wavy floors that had been in the water at some point. The ceiling was drooping and the windows were broken. But they were resilient and resourceful and resolved to make a go of it. They even had created a small dispensary where people could come to see the doctor. There were only 4 houses in Crossmore. You could see a 2 or 3 off in the distance, but most of the population lived down in the hollers. How did they get there? If you were too sick to ride a horse or walk or be carried, and even if the doctor came to you, somebody had to go all the way in to find him and bring him back, hopefully in the daylight, because the trails were not the trails we see in our national parks. These were trails with rocks and streams that ran through them and landslides. You never knew what was here today was going to be there tomorrow. You might come to a stream where the homemade bridge washed away. You might have to walk all the way down one side till you found a low spot and cross it. Mary would be at home and no communication. She didn't know whether the doctor would be home that day, night. And did he stay overnight and wait for the next morning? She hoped and prayed. Or was he in a ditch somewhere? And the doctor, when he got up there, he actually operated outside.
Oh my gosh.
Because the cabins were too dark. They didn't have windows. They were musty and, I'm sorry, dirty. Well, that's how they operated. And the doctor went on to do a lot. But Mary said, things are not going to get any better here until these people get some education. And she resolved to build a school. And I'm not going to tell you she built that school brick by brick. I'm going to tell you she built that school atom by atom. It was, now I think there wasn't very many dates in what I read. And I'm figuring this is at least 1915. There were regular houses back then, frame houses. And how do you get, you can't get there from here. It's just like that. How do you get the supplies? The pipes, the windows, the potbelly stove. How do you pay for it? Where do you find the people to build it? How do you pay them? And then the children, again, lived up over there in those coves. There was no school bus. I have to laugh at that because even today, we always have closed schools, and we wonder why, because in Johnson City there's no snow, but the buses can't get up there in the hollers. They still can't. So the children had to live at the school. So the school required a dormitory, and then we had to get a teacher and pay her and find a place for her to live. Mary Sloop accomplished this. And now I'm going to digress just a little bit and tell you how. So Mary also gave sewing lessons on Thursday afternoons to any girls who could come. And there was a family nearby that the Sloops had made friends with, the Millers. They had 5 kids. When the youngest one was still in diapers and Mrs. Miller passed away. Mr. Miller wanted to keep his little family together, but he worked public work. Public work was either sawmill, lumber mill, or the mines. And the sawmills and the lumber mills moved around, and they were not near, and who's going to go home in the dark? The men stayed at the camps. They only came home maybe on Saturday night because they had to work Saturday too. Well, Mr. Miller didn't know what to do. He decided that his oldest child, happened to be a girl, would stay home with the other 4 children. He would make a special effort to come home Wednesday night and check on them, and then he'd come home Saturday night and be there Sunday. His oldest child, her name was Epsy, and she was 10, taking care of a baby in diapers. And she did a good job. She was resourceful and responsible, except the scarlet fever came along and killed the baby. But she still persevered. And so she came to sewing lessons. She brought the little ones with her, and she gave them a toy and told them to sit in the corner and play while she did her sewing. And she didn't show up one Thursday, and Mary was, and there's no cell phone, no communication. All she could do was ask the other girls, do you know where Epsy is? Is one of the children sick? Miss Lupa, I don't know nothing about that, if they're sick or not, but I don't think Epsy's going to be coming to sewing classes anymore because she's going to get married. Married? You have to be 14 to get married. Oh, Epsy's going to be 13 soon, and when you're 13, you're going on 14, you can get married. Oh, she's going to marry that so-and-so and move to the other side of the ridge. That's how it was. Girls got married at 14. Your parents encouraged this because then you were out of the house and it was less mouth to feed. And boys were 15 and 16. They did that public work. They worked in the mines and the sawmills until they had enough money to buy themselves a piece of dirt, a cabin, and an old cow. And then their 14-year-old bride got to stay in that cabin while they went back and did the public work, and she was there by herself. So a lot of babies died, and a lot of young girls died. And the ones that lived when they were 20, they looked like they were 40. And Mary hated it. And she wasn't going to let this happen to Epsy. So she went to her father and said, please, let me send her to school. Now, to go to school, you had to go to Banner Elk, because Mary's school only got up to maybe grammar school. Banner Elk was 30 miles away. You had to board and pay tuition. And Mary wrote to people. She got the money for the boarding and the tuition, and she got it there, but Epsy didn't have any clothes to wear, just about any, and Mary didn't have any money for anything. She was resourceful, remember? She thought of some cousins she had back in that Piedmont area where she used to live, and she wrote to them because she figured they were the same size as Epsy. And she said, if you have any dresses that you could spare, could you send them for this little girl so she could go to school? And they wrote back and said, oh yes, we'd be more than happy to. And we'll send a trunk, and the little girl can keep the trunk and she can use it when she goes to school. Finally, the trunk came on a truck that was delivering mica to the mica factory, whatever that is. And Mary was so ecstatic. She got the key that had been mailed to her, and she opened up the trunk, and it was full of dresses. They were all black, because apparently her cousins had been in mourning. She took the dresses and she decided to air them out, and she hung them on her porch. And a woman walked by and said, hey, that's a store-bought dress. I really like it. It's black. Can I buy it? Sure. She sold all the dresses. She got money for fabric and underwear and shoes and socks and everything that Epsy needed to go to Banner Elk. But that's not the end of it. She started writing letters to everybody she knew and said, send me your clothes. Pants, shoes, socks, coats, dresses, skirts, preferably black. Anything, send it. And her friends began to send trunks of clothes. And when a trunk of clothes would arrive, she'd put the clothes on her front porch, and the people would come to buy it. And then it started to grow into the Tree Street's yard sale. She had to put the clothes in the backyard, and they started showing up early and earlier. She had to get chicken wire to go around her yard. And the people would rush in when the doors opened, and they'd find what they'd want, and they'd sit on it until they had time to go up and pay for it. Well, she found a couple, Aunt Pop, her name was Poppy, and Uncle Gilmore, and they had the retail, Jean. And they took over and started managing this yard sale. And eventually, they turned it into a bona fide store. And that store went on to make the money that paid for the schools. Today, Cross North School is still open. They have 3 locations. It caters to local children and children in transition. And it provides a healthy, happy, safe haven for them and a hopeful future. But I skipped ahead. I'm only on page 75. The story comes from this book, Miracle in the Hills. It's the autobiography of Mary Martin Sloop. And I have permission to tell these stories. And I don't have time to tell you about how the doctor built a generator. And I don't have time to tell you about the whiskey stills and all of that. It's really fun to read. But I think that I proved my point. I proved my point that anybody who lived in the Appalachian Mountains was resilient, resourceful, resolved to live there and do whatever it takes. And this will happen again. They will rebuild. Thank you.